Hey y'all, welcome to the Southern Appalachian Herbal Podcast. I'm Judson Carroll and I'm an herbalist. I'm also a wild crafter, a gardener, and herb grower. I'm coming to you from high atop the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, just a stone's throw from the Tennessee line, overlooking the Pisgah National Forest. Absolutely surrounded by the bounty of God's green earth. I spent most of my life wandering these mountains and learning about plants from the old-timers and all sorts of characters. On this show, we'll talk about herbs and how to use them, how to find them, how to grow them, how to make preparations. We'll talk about a lot of things. We can also talk about permaculture, homesteading, foraging, and living off the land. Most anything, really. You can email me at southernappalachianherbs@gmail.com if you have a question or a comment. You can also contact me through the Grow Network, where I'm a regular contributor and a moderator for the forums. And my blog is, of course, southernappalachianherbs@blogspot.com. All right, y'all. I'm going to sit my guitar down and let's talk about herbs.
Hey y'all, welcome to this week's show. It is an absolutely beautiful but really cold spring day here. I hope it's nice where you are. I spent much of the week foraging. The herb we'll get into today, may actually do a couple of herbs, so I'll go ahead and tell you what they are. Let's see, we'll do giant cow parsley or giant cow parsnip, also called hogweed. Alright, so Latin version of the name is Heracleum. I guess that's the way you pronounce it. This is a hard one to say. It's Heracleum mantagasianum, but I'm going to just call it hogweed or cow parsley, giant cow parsley, parsnip actually. Giant cow parsnip is really what I know it more as. So we'll get into that one, and it is a very interesting plant. I think you'll really enjoy this one, and I may have time to do a second. I think I probably will. It's going to be hydrilla. Hydrilla is super common. Just not much used, so we'll get through that one pretty quickly. Before we get into that, as I said, I have spent a lot of time foraging this week because it is finally ramp season. I always say in the mountains, really two plants come in early in the spring, and you have such a brief period of time to harvest ramps. And ramps are my favorite wild food. They just came up really this past Monday. So I got out there in the woods and I have been harvesting ramps like crazy. They come up about Easter. This is a week before Easter. So they actually, we're having an early spring. They came up 2 weeks early. At least a week early. Usually it's the week before Easter. So I'm going to say they came up a week early. By the week after Easter, depending on weather, they may last 2 weeks after Easter, but that's it. They're gone. And they are so good. They're just, they're amazing. They're wild leeks. They're in the allium family. I was talking with someone a few days ago, and she was saying she'd never harvested ramps before. And I said, okay, here's the deal. First of all, where I live at least, they usually grow around creeks, and they'll grow on the north side of the creek bed. Now, I do know of a couple spots in the mountains where they just grow in the woods, not by a creek. They like cool weather. They like damp soil. I can't tell you exactly where to find them, but I know where they grow where I live. I look for a creek. I go to the north side of the bank, usually find ramps this time of year. If you're off the mountain, down in the foothills, they probably grow, they're probably less creek oriented. I know in England they grow throughout the woods, where they call them ramsons. Same plant. They grow throughout Europe. Their Father Kunzel and Father Nape, they just loved ramps. So everybody loves ramps if you've gotten a chance to try ramps. We have ramp festivals in the mountains. It's just a real traditional spring thing, You got to remember, our ancestors, and this lasted a lot longer in the mountains than it did in most places, they stocked up for winter. Everything from the garden was preserved, meat was salted. Wintertime was not a time when you had a lot of fresh vegetables. Sauerkraut was essential for survival. You took those cabbages and fermented them, and they gave you vitamin C and fiber and everything you needed through the winter. Absolutely essential for survival. Here in the mountains, what people would do, they made a lot of kraut. In fact, there was once a huge sauerkraut industry here before Christmas trees really were promoted by the state as a way for mountain farmers to make a living. Well, folks up here were really poor. I mean, there was I remember talking with some of the old timers on the mountain, and they were telling me like in the 20s and 40s, really well into the 60s, people had no money. I mean, if you needed dollars, if you needed cash, you'd have to go work for a sawmill or something, maybe work for the railroad. And if you were lucky, you might make $1 a day. And you think about that. I mean, that money had to last you all year. So there was no money to go out and buy things, especially in the winter. I mean, you had made your money in the spring, and you were just hoping to survive through the winter. And so food preservation was really, I mean, it was essential for survival. So was hunting and trapping. Those were things you did in the winter, but you didn't have a lot of fresh vegetables. That sauerkraut, I mean, it was a lifesaver. Other than that, you'd have dried apples, dried pumpkins. Um, Maybe if you got into canning, you would put up some vegetables, but most people had dried green beans. So you'd take the beans, when you harvest them, and just take a thread and needle and go right through them and hang them up to dry, and that's what you had. So in terms of fresh vegetables, you didn't have a lot. One thing, as I was saying, that people did do was they grew a lot of cabbage, and I guess right around the time of the first frost or the first snow, they would pull up the head of cabbage, dig a hole a little bit bigger, turn it upside down, put it in, and cover it in soil. So all winter time, they had fermented cabbage, and they had fairly fresh cabbage. I mean, it would slightly freeze on the outside, and you just take those frozen, frostbitten leaves and peel them off, and inside you had a nice fresh head of cabbage. So that was really a big deal. The other was sour corn. They'd take corn and cut it off the cob, sweet corn, and ferment it just like you would sauerkraut. But there was no lettuce, there was no fresh vegetables, there was no tomatoes, there was no, whatever. Well, they may have had some carrots, but they would have been all dried and shrivelly. They were just good for going in with a pot roast, basically. They needed fresh vegetables. So spring foraging was absolutely essential for survival. And that's, when I decided to write a foraging cookbook, I said, let's just start with spring. And I did the spring foraging cookbook. It's available on Amazon, or you can buy it directly from me. That without that knowledge of foraging, especially up here at my elevation where it's cold and the winters were longer, our ancestors would not have survived. And so this time of year, the ramps come up. And as I was saying, I told my friend, this is basically what they look like. And you can pull up a picture of ramps online. They can easily, though, be confused with a couple of different plants. And, some people say they can be confused with daffodils. I don't see that. It's a wide, broad, thin leaf. Daffodil comes up more like a spike, No, I don't see that at all. Now, maybe from a distance. But the main thing is really lily of the valley. Lily of the valley is, of course, in the Liliaceae family, just as are onions and garlic. They have very similar leaves. Now, the thing with lily of the valley is a wonderful medicinal herb. It has digitalis-like compounds which slow and regulate the heartbeat if used in minute amounts. Now, you can imagine you're in the woods and you see what you think is wild ramps, which, like I said, 100 years ago, you needed that to survive after the winter. You needed those fresh vitamins and the immune supportive qualities of the alliums. And, you just pulled it up and ate it, you'd be dead an hour later. Lily of the valley is Toxic in moderate doses, let's say. It's going to slow your heart rate, it's going to slow your respiration, and if you have enough, it will stop your heart. The thing with ramps is they smell strongly of garlic and leeks and onions. I mean, they really smell more like garlic than anything else. So, the old foragers are saying is if it looks like an onion and smells like an onion, it's an onion. Well, in this case, it doesn't look like an onion at all. It really doesn't look like a leek. It actually looks more like a lily. But when you harvest it, it smells strongly of garlic. So, find ramps, that's how you find them. First, with your eyes, you look for these green, broad leaves coming up out of the ground, and then cut one or pick one and sniff it. If it smells like garlic, you're good to go. You have wonderful, wonderful ramps. They're sweet. They're not hot like garlic. They're just wonderful. They're absolutely my favorite spring foraging food. So I went out and I harvested, 5 pounds a day. I mean, I cut the tops. Very, very rarely, and usually only by accident, do I pull one up in its entirety. The reason is this plant has a bulb, right? You pull it up, it's done. You've killed the plant. It doesn't get to produce seeds. It doesn't get to reproduce. That's it. That's the way to wipe out a population of a plant in your area, is to pull them up and not allow them to regenerate. A lot of people have done that, and we have a lot fewer ramps now than we might have, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. They've been really popularized by magazines and websites, and there are a lot more people in the woods hunting for ramps now. Just, the way they hunt for ginseng and golden seal, and you got to do things sustainably. And my ramp patch that comes back every year, I just cut the tops. When I do get the bulbs, I like to pickle them. Ramps don't freeze well. When they dry, they get sort of a dark flavor. Sort of like dried chives, but a little smoky. It's not bad, but it's not that wonderful flavor of ramp. I would rather, I'd rather cook with chives than I would dried ramps. Not to say they're bad, but they're not my preference. They're not worth it, in other words. So I eat them fresh, mostly, or chop them up and make a pesto. To make a ramp pesto, just chop them fine, mix them with olive oil, salt, a little crushed red pepper, some chopped nuts. Pecans is what I usually use, but walnuts are actually preferable. Another friend of mine said, I love walnuts in a pesto. I'm like, absolutely. I mean, pine nuts are traditional in Italy. We don't have pine nuts in the United States. The stone pine, actually does grow out west. If you're in California or maybe even Utah, you might be able to have stone pine. It grows 100 years before it ever produces seeds, and it won't grow in the east. So we don't have pine nuts as a rule, or pinoles or whatever you want to call them. We do have pecans and hickory nuts, and so that's how I make my ramp pesto, and it preserves them, and they'll last forever like that, really. I mean, they're great. People say you ought to refrigerate them. I have refrigerated ramp pesto, but for long-term storage, I don't. I've never had a problem with it, but I'm not going to recommend it. I don't want you to get botulism in case I happen to be wrong. But used fresh, man, I put them in everything. Salads, first night I put them on a hamburger. Next morning, I chopped up a few ramp leaves and put them in with my scrambled eggs, and I had some pepper jack cheese, and it was fantastic. Then made pizza, made a good like New York style pizza with a real spice sauce, homemade sourdough, dough, and I didn't have anything but ramps and olives, and I just covered that pizza in ramps and olives and some mozzarella, a little parm. Mushrooms would have been preferable. I mean they have an earthy flavor, and it goes really anytime you can combine ramps with mushrooms, do it. But I just didn't happen to have any mushrooms on hands, and I bake pizza frequently, and this is one of the best pizzas I've ever made. I mean, ramps just phenomenal. So when that was finished, made spaghetti sauce. Threw a ton of ramps in there. Ramps, when they're cooked, have a very mild flavor, and you can really use a lot. They strengthen your immune system. They're what they call a blood cleanser or a spring tonic. They're good for cholesterol, really medicinal, antiviral, antibacterial. People in the mountains said if you didn't eat enough ramps to smell like ramps, you were going to be sick all spring. You know, maybe something to that. You definitely, if you eat raw ramps, people will know you've been eating raw ramps. You will very soon begin to sweat and breathe the scent of ramps. But cooked, they're very mild, no problem whatsoever. So I thought about, well, I've already discussed ramps a few times, in previous episodes of the show, and I've got a nice long chapter about them in my spring foraging cookbook. So I'm not going to go back over all my ramp recipes right now. Maybe I will again in the future, but you can definitely look that up. Now, the reason I figured I'd do another plant for spring is because maybe you grow where ramps, maybe you live where ramps don't grow. If that be the case, another early spring edible that is, well, it grows everywhere. I don't know of anywhere in the United States or North America where redbud will not grow. Now, redbud is a tree. It is a leguminous tree. So it's in the same family as locust and mimosa, acacia. It's a tree that's actually in the bean and pea family. Now, oftentimes you need to be very careful with leguminous plants. Wisteria, for instance, is a leguminous plant. There are many in the bean family. I think there's some 50,000 edible members of the legume family, and probably twice that many that are actually toxic. So you have to identify your legumes very carefully. The redbud is an absolute no-brainer. Okay, right now, if you go outside and you look around your yard or drive around your neighborhood, you're going to see a tree. It's not a very big tree, about the size of a dogwood, and it's going to be covered in bright, like magenta, red, pink, purplish flowers. And it's unique because the flowers actually grow all over the tree, not just like at the ends of the branches. They'll be growing on the trunk sometimes. Usually they're more on the branches. That is one of my favorite wild edibles. The taste is like sweet, fresh garden peas, and it's the buds we use. You need to harvest quite a few of them, and there's no reason not to, because people think that red buds are like a weedy tree, like a mimosa. They try to get rid of them. I don't understand that at all. Where I live, they don't quite grow at my elevation, but if I go down to the valley of Roan Mountain, Tennessee, or I could go down to Morganton, Lenoir, anywhere in that range, Wilkesboro, just down the mountain a little bit, Hickory certainly, but there's a whole stretch, like from Roan Mountain clear to Elizabethton, where the railroad used to go, and redbuds and princess trees grow all through there. Princess tree's not edible; it has some medicinal uses. Very pretty tree, very pretty tree. There's few places, honestly, in the spring more beautiful than that road. Just say between Elk Park, North Carolina, and Elizabethton, Tennessee, or you can turn and go up to Bristol. It's going to be the same. The railroad tracks went through there, and somehow those redbud seeds got distributed, and I mean, it's just beautiful. Just, pink, purple flowers, the spring grass coming in, the daffodils are growing. Just gorgeous, honestly. Forsythia bushes are blooming. But let me tell you about the redbuds. Like I said, one of the very first trees to bring any color after winter, and they taste like fresh, sweet garden peas. I love them. Most often, I pick as many as I can, and I just eat them as I'm walking or hiking. But they're great in salads. Just briefly sautéed with olive oil and butter and salt, they make an excellent side dish. A lot of times I'll just put a few on a plate as a garnish. The flavor's sweet. It's refreshing. It just has a slight wild flavor to it. I don't think anybody would object to redbud blossoms. And I actually, because they have that sweetness, I often combine them with more bitter flowers, such as Forsythia, which is coming at the same time. Now, Forsythia is that bright yellow bush. The flowers are bitter. Now, the bitterest part of the bitter is the white part where it meets the green stem at the base of the flower. Pick that off, and again, they're very mild, actually. Very perfumey, though. So I like to kind of use them in moderation. Actually, a friend of mine makes an herbal bitters formula out of Forsythia blossoms using that bitterness of the stem end, and that's very good. Um, it could be a little strong for some people, but a real nice way to use spring flowers in a way that most people really wouldn't expect is with poached fish. Now, y'all know I love to fish. I talk about it in a lot of my wild foraging subjects, when I do it on the show. I catch a lot of trout. I love my tinkara rod. I go up little creeks, and any mild flavored fish would work with this. Okay, and honestly, this dish just screams spring. I usually begin to fish for trout as soon as the snow begins to melt. I want to be out in the stream, and because I use a tinkara rod, I don't really do a lot of wading, so I can be out there when it's really, cold and snowy, and there's no one else around. I just stand on the bank, and tinkara rod's like a cross between a fly rod and a cane pole, and it is like the most effective way to catch trout in small streams in the mountains. If you're in a different area, you've got more bass or catfish, you're definitely going to want some heavier tackle. But certainly for bass, bluegill, perch, this recipe, it's going to really work with these spring flowers. And it's a way you can just kind of like bring the woods home. And this is like such a pretty dish. If you were another friend online I was talking with the other day, went to a restaurant in San Francisco, and he's in California, and to him this was like common, right? 5 people, the bill was like $560 some, and I'm like, what? In North Carolina, you could go to, if you went to the Gamekeeper, that's probably the most expensive restaurant in Watauga County, and it's really very nice. 5 people with a bill for $500 would never happen. The cost of living out that way is so crazy. But in a restaurant like the French Laundry or something that really charges those high dollar amounts, this would be a dish that would be featured on a table like that. And you can do this for free in your own home. I cannot emphasize how impressed people are going to be if you do this. So any kind of lean fish, I think a lean fish is going to go better with this. If you like catfish or something, I don't see any reason why you couldn't do it. Any fish is good, really, cooked in a court bouillon. Now, this is a French court bouillon. It's not Creole or Cajun court bouillon, which is very, well, different, actually. Same tradition, same concept, but totally different flavor. The Creole is more French. The Cajun, surprisingly, actually, because Creole is a mix of cultures, whereas Cajun is really predominantly French, with sometimes a little German or Scots-Irish mixed in. But the Creole is much lighter in flavor, which is really what the French court bouillon is. And the Cajun is, well, I'd say the Creole would be a little spicier. The Cajun is thicker. It's more of like a sauce. But the French is just a broth made from water, chopped onions, some peppercorns, a bay leaf or two, a handful of parsley, and a few other just mild aromatic herbs, things that are coming in the spring. Mint's coming in, I'd throw mint in there. Celery tops, certainly. Chopped carrot, several slices of lemon. You want a little acid in there. If you don't have lemon, you could use a little vinegar. Cup of white wine, and some cloves. It's a simple cooking broth. It's not, now it can be simmered down and made into a sauce, but essentially you're just cooking your fish gently in an aromatic, flavorful liquid. A little acidic, that helps firm the flesh of the fish, and it brightens it, and if the fish is a little fatty, it cuts through the fat. So I always will put some citrus or vinegar, but definitely some wine. Bring it to a low boil and then reduce it to a simmer. And just poach your fish in this liquid, okay? The easiest way to poach fish is if you have a fish spatula, just lay it down in the broth. When the meat just begins to flake a little bit, take it out, okay? If you don't have a fancy fish spatula, you can absolutely wrap it in some cheesecloth and just lower it in. Or you can just toss it in there gently, but when you scoop it out, it's going to come out in chunks. You're not going to get a whole fish, And, it's totally up to you. But you just want to cook it through. You don't want it to sit in there and boil and fall apart. If it does, go ahead and take it and flake it off the bone and make some fish patties like I told you how to do last week, or fish meatballs, or make a soup out, put it in a casserole. Any kind of flaked fish, like if you ever had tuna casserole, and you like it, which I do, I'm a casserole fanatic when they're made from scratch. You can put any kind of poached fish in there. It doesn't have to be tuna. Literally any fish, with maybe one or two exceptions, like a poisonous blowfish or barracuda or something, is going to go great in a fish stew or a fish casserole. And I mean, that's something, that's a big part of my heritage and something I like a lot. I mean, we have a fish stew competition down here on the PD River. I'm up in the mountains, but central of the state, I think south of Charlotte, you start hitting the PD River, and there's some excellent fish stew traditions going from there east, both in North and South Carolina and parts of Georgia. And I mean, they're fantastic. Actually, fish stew was huge in Virginia in colonial times. Martha Washington has a great recipe for a fish stew that maybe we'll get into another day. But so if you don't ever cook your fish, it is perfect. Taste it. You're probably going to want to add a little salt and pepper, a few more herbs on the plate. If for instance you tried poaching fish and maybe that's not your thing, bake it or fry it. Okay, I mean, I'm not going to say you have to do it one way. You can bread your fish and fry it. You can put it in a pan and bake it with butter or olive oil, whatever you like. I mean, fix your fish the way you like it. But I think trout poached is ideal. I mean, trout is mountain trout. We mostly have rainbow trout here. I don't care if it's brown trout, cutthroat trout, whatever. It is such a mildly flavored fish that it's just easily overwhelmed. I mean, if you bread and fry trout, you can't really tell the difference between that trout and any other fish, right? I mean, if you gave me a fried, let's say bass, for instance. Now, I mean, I can tell perch, I can tell bluegill, flounder certainly, but trout is so mild. You don't want to overwhelm it. Pan fry with lemon pepper in butter and olive oil, that's fantastic, but I think poaching really works well. But let's say you have your fish cooked however you like it. I don't care if it's breaded and golden brown, poached French style, whatever. Put it on a plate, put some butter on top, sprinkle some Redbud and Forsythia flowers on it, maybe some violet flowers, put a few capers, people would literally pay $100 for that dish in a fancy French restaurant, and put a nice glass of wine with it, and you can figure out how someone 2 or 3 glasses of wine, and they're going to come up with $568 or whatever it was for 5 people to eat at this restaurant. I could not believe, because I looked. He actually he put a scanned copy of the receipt. He's like, his question was, they put in an automatic 20% gratuity, and then ask me to also tip them. And he's like, is this normal? And yeah, actually it's really not. But in California, where, I mean, even the mandatory minimum wage is higher than most restaurant owners could afford to pay their waiters and busboys, and they're going to nickel and dime you for anything. Well, $568 for 5 people? Wow. I mean, for one meal of chicken and a couple of drinks? Man, I mean, I've worked in catering, commercial food, commercial kitchens. My policy was always, I didn't like being tipped. I think good service should go with a meal. I was never comfortable with the tipping aspect of things. In France they actually don't allow tipping, but in America it's part of our tradition. But that 20% gratuity on a $500 bill, whoa, first of all. But, I mean, for what they paid for chicken and a couple of cocktails, wow. I mean, that wouldn't fly in North Carolina. I don't care if it's Asheville or Chapel Hill. That ain't going to fly in North Carolina. But seriously, do maybe a little. This time of year, you could do some sautéed vegetables, some asparagus and ramps, or wild garlic, maybe some fiddlehead ferns. I like to just, steam saute. We talked about that before. Put it in the pan with some water, salt, and olive oil. Let it steam off the liquid and then saute in the oil. That's the simplest way to cook any vegetable. Basically, it's tender enough to do it that way. Put that on the plate. Let's say I've got some asparagus or fiddleheads, maybe some ramps, anything, really, any of the spring vegetables that we talked about in this book. I would absolutely crumble some bacon on top. I think bacon and fish go particularly well together. Put your fish on top of that bed of vegetables. Sprinkle on some of those pretty flavorful spring flowers. They really will enhance the flavor of the dish like you would not believe. And maybe a little piece of, chunk of hearty sourdough bread, and take those pan drippings and just put them over there like a sauce. And ooh, man, that's gonna be good. I mean, that's gonna be really good. And of course, there are 1,000 variations on this. Yeah, you can absolutely make a sauce out of that poaching liquid. And I'll say that before I move on. You've got that liquid you poach the fish in, so now it's flavored with all those herbs and vegetables, and it's got a little fish flavor. Strain everything out. You don't want any fish bones in there. You don't want any bits of vegetable matter. Reduce it. Cook it down to where maybe, let's say, you have a cup left. Then it's going to be really flavored. It's going to be a fairly strongly flavored liquid, a broth, essentially. Make your roux. Take your pan, equal parts flour and butter. Cook it together. Just don't brown it now. You just want to cook the raw taste out of the flour, and blend in that broth slowly. Maybe fortify it with a little cream or cheese. Cheese goes really well with fish. That's not something we do a lot in America, except for a filet of fish, which you go to a fast food place and it's a little fried cod with a piece of American plastic cheese on it. It really, wow. I mean, Parmesan's fantastic with fish. So cream cheese would actually be very nice. Neufchâtel. I mean, I could think of 100 cheeses. Swiss cheese, obviously, that's a go-to. Swiss and Parm are what we normally use in kitchens when we're cooking. And you could make a nice creamy sauce and put it over that fish. You could absolutely do an egg-based sauce, hollandaise, which is essentially just a hot mayonnaise with lemon, and that's gonna. You can't go wrong. Or you could do butter and mushrooms and some onions. Maybe a little cream if you want, splash of brandy. Just don't overwhelm the fish. Remember, when we're cooking, we always want to enhance the flavor of the ingredients. That's, the whole reason we're using fresh, local, or wild food, seasonal food. Make them as best they can be. Enhance the flavor. Don't overwhelm the flavor. That is a huge mistake, really, in modern cooking. And I don't know, in the 50s, when people started moving away from home cooking and they started doing more like frozen foods and processed foods, a lot of the techniques of cooking really were lost. And I think with the Food Network and the cooking shows that really became popular in the 90s, people started seeing chefs using a lot of ingredients and a lot of strong flavors. And I think home cooks can sometimes go even a little too far in that regard. But I mean, I've had had food in restaurants that was so over seasoned that I could say, what actually is this that I'm eating? If I can't actually taste the meat and know exactly what I'm having, then you've used too much seasoning. And I think, I don't know. Emeril Lagasse was big on using a lot of spices. So many. I don't want to blame Emeril, but he was at BAM, and people thought the more cayenne pepper you threw on something, the better. Now, I like hot, spicy food, but balance the flavors. Balance the flavors. And that's an aside. It's a caveat. I think a lot of people try to, I don't know, they almost cover up the taste of food by using too much or a heavier sauce than needed, or like when everything's just fried and served with buffalo wing sauce or ranch dressing, do you really know what you're eating? I mean, you're really tasting the ketchup or the hot sauce or the ranch dressing. No, I mean, if it's good food, present good food in the best way. If it's maybe a little off, if it's a little spoiled, I can see why you would use some fish. If it's really gamey, like a raccoon or something that's been dumpster diving, yeah, I can see why you would try to cover that flavor up. In my experience, that's rarely successful. Rarely successful. Um, Mutton, for instance, is a very strong flavor. Lamb to mutton is like night and day. You can't make mutton taste like lamb. You have to work with the flavor of mutton. And actually, in Kentucky, they barbecue it and smoked meat with a good barbecue sauce, and it's pretty darn good. If you try to present mutton as lamb, you're not going to fool anybody. I don't care what sauce you put on it. That's just one example. And anyway, let's get into the herb of the day, and that's Heracleum. Not going to even try to pronounce the second half of the name again. We're going to call it cow parsnip. That's what I know it as. Not much used anymore in herbal medicine at all. Considered a weed, like most of the herbs in this book, but actually it is very useful. In the Irish tradition, John Kehoe says that it's hot in nature, and when bruised and applied to swellings, it disperses them and dissolves them. And that's one of the more common uses for the cow parsnip. It's used as a poultice for wounds, and it's one of the better ones. It's actually one that I would put in like the top 5 or so herbs for bruises, sprains, swellings, etc. Brother Aloysius said cow parsnip was used for epilepsy. Now, they used the root, not exactly sure how, he didn't say. But he said it was useful for epilepsy, abdominal pain, and worms. In Poland, it was traditionally used. Sophie Hodorowicz-Snab says the plant was a popular food in Poland, and the leaves eaten like spinach and included in a sour soup. And that's actually pretty common in the mountains of North Carolina too, among foragers. It's another one of those spring herbs that our ancestors would have looked for. Now it's just considered a weed. It's pretty tasty, actually. It was found to improve the appetite and help with fevers. Now, anything in this family, Apiaceae family, that family includes carrots and dill, fennel, many of our favorite herbs, anise, I could go on and on. Many of our favorite herbs and vegetables come from the Apiaceae family. They are umbelliferous plants. We have to be very careful, though, with them because at least 2 of them are 2 of the most poisonous plants on earth, poison hemlock and water hemlock or water parsnip. They can be very hard to tell apart. Poison hemlock, as I've said many times, is almost identical to wild carrot. So we always want to be careful with this. But when it comes to cow parsnip, giant cow parsnip, kind of hard to miss this one. It's huge. I've actually seen these things grow almost as tall as a house. I mean, so as an edible wild plant for natives and early settlers, it was a gold mine. It kind of looks like a giant version of Angelica. It doesn't always get that big, but in the right conditions, it likes a lot of water. I'd say enough sun, sort of like partial shade, not like full sun. Actually, when I see it in fields in the full sun, it's usually not that big, but it's still a pretty darn big plant to be in the Apiaceae family. The American Eclectic Materia Medica. Now that was, the eclectics were the first real herbal school in America. They combined European medicine with Native American herbs, and that's why they were called eclectic. Really important, hugely influential. Botanists, Audubon was part of that group. They became aware of this plant, and they said Therapeutic action. Heracleum is stimulant, carminative, and according to Christian and Griffin, diuretic, expectorant, and antispasmodic. So, stimulant stimulates appetite, like they said in Poland, it was good to improve appetite. Carminative means it helps with stomach issues, gas and bloating and indigestion and all that. Diuretic removes excess fluid. Expectorant helps bring up mucus from the lungs. And antispasmodic means it's good against any kind of cramping. From menstrual to muscle cramps to Charlie horses, They said it has been found beneficial as a stomatic and carminative in dyspepsia. That's the old word for upset stomach. That was a big deal in early America when most meat was slightly spoiled before you got to eat it, unless you lived on the farm or hunted, and before refrigeration, etc., before pasteurization. I mean, people had upset stomachs a lot. You could actually die of dyspepsia. But anyway, dyspepsia attended with cardialgia and flatulence. It means chest pains and bloating. Normally, that's not a heart attack. They don't mean you're having heart issues. It's that pain in your chest when you have painful gas. A heart attack can often mimic that and vice versa. So we always want to be a little careful with such terms. They said, and has been used in epilepsy. Again, they don't tell us how. The leaves have been employed externally as a rubefacient, meaning it warms and reddens the skin. Why would you want to do that? Well, it helps with arthritis and such. And when made into a cataplasm, form a good application to macerate abscesses. Cataplasm is basically a poultice, and they're saying, like if you had a boil or something, it would help bring it to a head. Resources of the Southern Fields and Forests, written during the Civil War, says that cow parsnip was very common in the mountains of North Carolina, and I can attest to that. That is where I see it most. I mean, we have that one in abundance. Described as an acrid plant. Acrid, that's that rubefacient quality. Much esteemed by the Indians. That would probably be the Cherokee and Catawba. And Bigelow, in his Materia Medica, said is of the opinion that it is poisonous and should be used cautiously when gathered from wet places. Again, this is in the Apiaceae family. You want to do your research. I haven't found any problem with it. But then again, it's a plant I don't eat a ton of. I've never really used the root at all. Now, maybe it's the root that it has a poisonous quality. I don't know. Leaves and stems, they're fine to me. But that's, let's look it up. Let's see. We'll go on and we'll see if another author gives us a little more information. Maybe Botany in a Day probably has, or Plants for a Future might give us a good information about the any potential toxicity. Going back to resources of Southern Foods and Forests, he said the root and leaves have an unpleasant and rank odor, and the taste is pungent and acrid. I haven't messed much with the root. I don't find the leaves to be that bad, actually. Its qualities are certainly active. Griffith says the root in a dried state is used as a diuretic expectorant and an antispasmodic. So that's the more medicinal element of the plant. It has been greatly employed by empirics. Empirics were another school of herbalists that relied on empirical evidence, experience. I'm basically an empiric. Dr. Griffith quotes a paper by Dr. Uru of Salem, Massachusetts, read to the Massachusetts Medical Society in 1803, where he reports that 3 out of 5 cases of epilepsy were cured by it. I am thinking, yes, that would be the diuretic effect. I don't know how, but apparently fluid retention can aggravate certain epileptic conditions, and diuretics were the go-to herb before modern medicine. Probably doesn't work for all cases of epilepsy, and it may not even be epilepsy proper. I mean, you can go into seizure when you're in great trauma, if you're having a heart condition, if you've been severely injured, if you're bleeding out. I mean, there are different things that can cause seizing. He says he gave it in large doses, both in substance and in infusion. That means the raw plant and as a tea. Dr. Cox in the American Dispensatory recommends it as a stomatic and carminative. and in cases of dyspepsia accompanied with flatulence and cardialgia. He used a strong decoction of it with benefit, so a tea essentially. The leaves are used externally as a rubefacient and as cataplasms and abscesses, and the seeds are said to be expectorant. Dr. Eicherden, I guess, says the northern Indians used a portion of the hollow stem of this plant to imitate the voice of a male deer to attract the female within gunshot. Yes, the stem of the cow parsnip has been used as a deer call. I believe it was also used as a duck call by some tribes. It's an interesting plant. King's Medical Dispensatory of 1898 says it is stimulant, antispasmodic, and carminative, used in a decoction in flatulency and dyspepsia. Powdered root taken daily in epilepsy. And continued for some time with a strong infusion of the leaves and tops at night has been found successful. I don't know. People have asked me before, are there herbs that are useful for epilepsy? And all I can say is there are a lot of herbs that have been traditionally used for epilepsy. I don't have experience with them, and I don't really know how they work. But I guess this one would be worth looking into. He said recent trials with a saturated tincture of the root seems to indicate that it has some power over epilepsy, though the condition in which it is specifically applicable has not yet been determined. Well, remember it's also listed as antispasmodic, so that could be it. It's diuretic and antispasmodic. Recommended also in asthma, colic, amenorrhea, dysmenorrhea, palsy, apoplexy. Those are palsy, it's trembling. Apoplexy is essentially a seizure. It's maybe it is more the antispasmodic aspects of the plant, and intermittents, and that's usually intermittent fevers with malaria. So getting up to more modern use, Peterson Field Guide says root tea was widely used by American Indians for colic, cramps, headaches, sore throats, colds, coughs, flu, externally poulticed on sores, bruises, swellings, rheumatic joints, boils, etc. In folk use, root tea was used for indigestion, gas, asthma, and epilepsy. Powdered root was taken along with a strong tea of the leaves and tops with epilepsy. I wonder where they got that from. Well, I think we know. It came from King's Medical Dispensatory of 1898. Root contains, now this is very interesting. The root contains psoralen. That's not the way you pronounce it. The P is actually silent, but I wanted to emphasize it because it has been used in the treatment of psoriasis, which also starts with a P. Psoralen for psoriasis. Anyway, psoralen for psoriasis, leukemia, and AIDS. So this plant is actually has a lot of potential medicinally. I don't know how it's used for leukemia and AIDS. I don't have that information, but it would be worth, if you have a concern in that regard, trying to find that documentation from medical journals, and it may be very worth looking into. And Botany A Day says the roots and seeds are antispasmodic, carminative, and expectorant. Tea of the root is good for nausea, gas, and indigestion. The fresh root is acrid and should be dried prior to use. Now that's where I knew Botany A Day would get it. The juice of the fresh root is acrid or irritating, needs to be dried prior to use. That's the toxicity that was mentioned earlier. A bath, poultice, or tea of the fresh root is used in the treatment of paralysis. The mature green leaves have an analgesic effect on the teeth and gums. So, this common weed that most people want to eradicate is quite medicinal and has some good edible uses as well. And as I promised, we'll do hydrilla real quick because I only have like a sentence on it. It's also called Indian star vine, Florida elodia, water thyme. Little information at all. Plants for a Future just says medicinal use of hydrilla used in the treatment of abscesses, boils, and wounds, especially if there is debris in the wounds. A dried powder of the plant is applied to cuts and wounds to help accelerate healing. That's all we know about hydrilla. So that one definitely bears investigation. And that is actually a weed, so-called, that they have been trying to eradicate. it can really take over ponds and water and such. So finding a medicinal use for that one would be very useful, very, very worthwhile. So let's leave it there, and y'all go out and enjoy this beautiful spring weather if it's not too cold where you live. Remember, redbud blossoms are delicious. Forsythia blossoms are good a little bit at a time. Pick off the stem end and the white part. And ramps are phenomenal. Phenomenal. If you don't live where you can grow ramps, see if you can, if you don't live where they grow wild, see if you can grow some in pots. There are some seed companies that offer ramp seeds or bulbs. Probably start with like maybe strictly medicinal herbs. That's Richo Check's company. There are a few. Otherwise, plan your trip to the mountains and maybe take a couple home with you if you can, if it's legal. It's not always in a lot of places. Don't forget, I'm having a plant walk in Pinehurst, North Carolina. I'm looking at it somewhere around April 15th. So email me, Judson@judsoncarroll.com, if you're interested in that. Small fee. I'm going to take you out for a couple hours and show you all kinds of edible and medicinal plants. The redbuds may still be around at that time if the weather stays cool like this and there's not heavy rains or anything. Maybe not. I've been down in Pinehurst a lot lately, and the cherry trees are absolutely beautiful in bloom. And cherry is a very medicinal plant. We'll certainly talk about that. But there'll be so many herbs coming up by about April 15. I'm not going to do it on tax day, but this will be a nice way to relax your mind and have a little enjoyment after the stress of tax time. I pray Donald Trump is back in office soon. He did more to lower taxes and simplify the tax system for regular people than any president since the income tax was instituted. Our ancestors didn't pay income tax. That's right, look it up. Look at when the income tax was instituted. Somehow the entire federal government was able to fund itself on fees and tariffs and such as that. The American people got to keep their money. Now, depending on your income bracket, you either work a third or half the year to pay the government and hope you can get by on the rest of it. It's not much different than the mountain folks that would make $1 a day and hope working 6 months in a sawmill would provide for their family the rest of the year. And it's only going to get worse. Unless we have some serious reforms. Serious reforms. I mean, you look at artificial intelligence, probably going to take it. I mean, artificial intelligence could easily replace half the workforce in America and be more efficient and do the job better for no money. So there's not going to be any incentive. And I don't know what's going to happen in 4 or 5 years when AI is instituted. Y'all better learn to raise your own food and forage and do your own herbal medicine now. Because trust me, I've been there. 2008, I almost lost everything. I know what it's like to suddenly have no money and plenty of debt. These skills were a lifesaver for me. And if your job's replaced by a computer or a robot in the blink of an eye with no warning and half the workforce is out, what the argument's going to be. It's going to be Democrats arguing for universal basic income, like the government sends you a check every month, put everybody on welfare. We just added $2 trillion to the deficit. America's flat broke. Our dollars are losing value. A $2,000 check from the federal government may not even put gas in your car and buy your groceries. It's time now to learn to be as self-sufficient as possible. Because, between inflation and taxes and high interest rates and the looming specter of artificial intelligence taking everybody's job, look at it. Almost everything in the banking industry could be done by computers, and they're closing branches all over the country. Medical processing, insurance. That's just off the top of my head. Those could easily be replaced by AI in the blink of an eye. Graphic design. I mean, you can think about like when they film a movie and they hire like 100 extras just to walk around the background. Um, AI could just computer generate those people. They're not necessary anymore. They've already said they want to replace all elementary school teachers with artificial intelligence, and within the first couple of years of its rollout. You got, a decent sized high school with 100 employees could be reduced to 3. I mean, a principal, a head teacher to basically oversee the curriculum, and the janitor. Everything else done by virtual learning. Well, I mean, they pretty much prepared us for that during the COVID lockdown. Everybody went to virtual learning. It's not crazy to think. McDonald's has already done a lot of virtual stuff with their ordering system. Um, Amazon's looking at driverless vehicles and little robots to deliver your packages to you, and even like drones and such. We could seriously, and this, I mean, Elon Musk is saying within 5 years, um, be ready for this. Well, how ready for it can you be? I mean, especially with inflation the way it is. I mean, the money in your bank is worth a fraction of what it was 10 years ago. It buys less food. It buys less electricity. It buys less gasoline. I mean, you could try to save up and be financially prepared, but inflation is like, termites eating your home when it comes to your money. Really, if you haven't gotten into gardening, foraging, raising small livestock, hunting, fishing, even trapping, yes, I know that's controversial, and herbal medicine, certainly. If you haven't gotten into it by now, it is time to absolutely prioritize living kind of off grid, off the system, because you may have to. I mean, I will never forget 2008 when suddenly my business went under. Wow, it was bad. I mean, I lost everything in like almost everything in like a 48-hour period, and was over $250,000 in debt. And yeah, I took every contract job, every lousy job, and learned to live on like $5 a day or less to pay off that debt and get out of that position. And so, I'm a little more prepared than most people. And I mean, they say the average American doesn't even have $1,000 in their bank account to cover an emergency expense, and they're walking around with tens of thousands in credit card debt and student loans and all that. This is not the zombie apocalypse we're preparing for. I mean, having some ammunition and a few firearms is all well and good, but what you need is food, and learn to make your own medicine. And remember the permaculture principles. Have 3 ways of achieving every necessary goal, every need. Like 3 ways to get water. How do you get water into your house? Are you on municipal water? Is that your only source? It better not be. You need to learn rainwater collection, maybe drill a well, store water. I mean, there's so many different. I have 4 ways to get water on my property, none of which are related to any government service, and only one of which relies on electricity, and that's the pump for the well. I need to get a hand pump, to back that up. My grandfather had a hand pump. I learned to use one when I was very young. But I still have, even if the well doesn't work, 3 ways to get water. You don't have water, you're dead. Figure that out now, because you don't know what tomorrow's going to hold. And, that's the way I live, because I live in an area where an ice storm, or a hurricane, actually, the hurricanes like Katrina came right up the mountain and knocked everything out for weeks. That happened right around that time, around '08 as well. That was pretty bad. We went from 2 hurricanes in a row, and then the financial collapse. But wherever you live, anything. I mean, you would think Pinehurst, North Carolina would be perfectly secure and safe, because it's, a retirement community, and there are more retired generals here per capita, and military officers than anywhere in the country. It's actually extremely wealthy and influential area. Yeah, I mean, it really is. There are a lot of millionaires in Pinehurst, and you'd think that they have everything secure, right? Well, a little over a year ago, I think it was Thanksgiving Day, someone went and shot up the power stations. We had a terrorist attack. I was down helping out with some family, and suddenly the lights were out, and the entire county was out of electricity for days. A terrorist attack, and it didn't even make the 6 o'clock news. They're like, somebody shot at the power station in Pinehurst, and no one knows the motive. It was a terrorist attack. And you never know when that's going to happen. You could be in the safest community on the face of the earth. And a solar flare could wipe out anything, not even a human being having anything to do with it. Last time a solar flare hit real bad was in late 1800s, and all the telegraph lines just burst into flames, blew up. That can happen. If a solar flare hit 5 minutes from now, your computer's dead, your car won't start, you have no electricity in your home, your cell phone doesn't work. These are things. Yeah, anyway, I don't want to freak you out or anything, but simple steps toward preparedness. Make a list of all your needs, figure out at least three ways to satisfy those needs, and begin implementing them slowly. Don't freak out. Practically, a little each month, a little each year even. If you learn one skill per year, you're light years ahead of everybody else. Yeah. If you learn to work on your own vehicle or plant a garden or do your own plumbing, you just went into the top 5-10% of your community, because most people don't know how to do anything these days. Even cook for themselves. Learn to cook for yourself if you don't know how. Anyway, y'all, I'll get off my soapbox now. Y'all have a good one, and I'll talk to you next time.
The information in this podcast is not intended to diagnose or treat any disease or condition. Nothing I say or write has been evaluated or approved by the FDA. I'm not a doctor. The U.S. government does not recognize the practice of herbal medicine, and there is no governing body regulating herbalists. Therefore, I'm really just a guy who studies herbs. I'm not offering any advice. I won't even claim that anything I write or say is accurate or true. I can tell you what herbs have been traditionally used for. I can tell you my own experience and if I believe an herb has helped me. I cannot nor would I tell you to do the same. If you use an herb anyone recommends, you are treating yourself. You take full responsibility for your health. Humans are individuals and no two are identical. What works for me may not work for you. You may have an allergy, a sensitivity, an underlying condition that no one else even shares and you don't even know about. Be careful with your health. By continuing to listen to my podcast or read my blog, you agree to be responsible for yourself, for your own research, make your own choices, and not to blame me for anything ever.